What drives someone to change the world? Welcome to Social Trailblazers, where we seek to answer just that question. Join Kelly Gagnon, CEO of Nonprofit Marketing Nerd, as she interviews leading social innovators and nonprofit changemakers. This podcast is brought to you by Donorbox, the easiest way for nonprofits to rock their online donations.
In this episode of Social Trailblazers, I'm joined by Lori Zoss Kraska, founder of Growth Owl, and honestly, a true powerhouse in the realm of corporate sponsorships. Lori has dedicated her entire career to helping purpose-driven organizations and businesses secure the funding, resources, and support they need to thrive. And honestly, this episode is filled with so many nuggets that nonprofits and associations can use when they're trying to figure out really how to level up or maybe even enter into the field of developing corporate sponsorships. This episode is jam-packed with actionable strategies you can use to build strong, mutually beneficial partnerships with corporations. Welcome to this episode of Social Trailblazers. Well, Lori, thank you so much for taking time to join us and share a little bit about Growth Owl, you as a human, and some of the behind the scenes. But first, people that maybe don't know, and I know for a lot of us on LinkedIn, we know a lot about you. You have a lot of followers, but what is Growth Owl?
Yeah, so Growth Owl is a consultancy where we outreach on behalf of purpose-driven organizations, nonprofits, associations, startups, anybody that I feel has a good purpose, to help them connect with Fortune 1000 corporations for things like funding, sponsorship dollars, resources, partnerships, and other types of generalized sponsorship. And we do it in several different ways. It could be direct outreach. It can be training you on how to do it. It could be a hybrid of both. It could be training only. And then I do actually a lot of board work as well, working with boards of directors to help them understand the impact of what corporate sponsorship and corporate support can do and how they can get involved in that. So that's a general overview. We've got clients all over the United States and a few global.
Awesome. And I'm so amazed. I would say out of all the guests that have come on Social Trailblazers, your work is the most out of my wheelhouse.
Okay.
So I'm so excited to learn more about it.
Yeah.
I am curious, how did you start? Like that seems like such a niche you're in right now. How did you start doing that work?
Yeah, so it dates back to the time I spent in public media. So I spent just about 10 years working with NPR and PBS stations on their behalf. And I managed a team that went out and did very similar work. We went out and spoke with various corporations to find funding for our stations and their programming. And a lot of folks don't realize that it's really up to individual NPR and PBS stations to really find the funding that helps support their local programming. And that's where my team and myself came in. And I thought to myself over the years, as much as I love public media and still work with some public media folks today, I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take the success that we've had engaging these Fortune 1000s and other larger companies and translate that to all different sizes of nonprofits, associations, and other purpose-driven organizations. So as much as I loved my work in public media, I always had this entrepreneurial bug. And I finally decided to let it out, per se, in 2018 when I started Growth Owl. And we've been successfully been doing this since 2018, but I really attribute it back to my roots at public media.
Wow. Okay. And I think, for a lot of the Social Trailblazers listeners, they are from the social service agencies.
Yeah.
And, right now when this is airing, it's pre-recorded right now when it's airing, it's in the middle of end of year giving. And for a lot of people, they're looking for matching donations. They're looking for partnerships for and it might be too late this year, but for next year, what are, for those social service agencies, what are key elements organizations should focus on for pitches to be successful, especially for sponsorship?
You know what? I think the most important thing is actually the how you do it at first versus what you're actually pitching. Because when you're talking about these decision makers that have a lot going on, there are a lot of folks that oversee the corporate foundation or they oversee corporate sponsorship. And there's about dozens, hundreds of other things they have going on, right? So it's important that you capture their attention very quickly, right? So I am a huge fan of what I call utilizing the power of brevity, really understanding that you're most impactful in saying fewer but more qualified words. So to go along with this, when I take a look at what my clients are doing in terms of outreach, the first thing I look at is how long are your emails that you're sending to potential sponsors, right? Or to potential donors. And in the email audits that I've done, nonprofits are averaging anywhere from 400 to 500 words. That is way too much. You're saying way too much about yourself. We have to remember that the whole idea of that first email is just to keep the conversation going. It's not to get the sponsorship. It's not to get the donation. It's, can we connect to get something going to a next conversation? So I like to suggest emails that are 200 words or less, really focusing on who are you? How do you connect to this organization? Why them? They want to know that you know why them. Why are they the perfect person, or the perfect organization to support? And finally, what do you want next? Do you want a meeting? Do you want a phone call? Do you want an opportunity to send information? So I think starting with that is extremely helpful, because I can tell you that more than 50% of the other organizations that are doing what you do are not doing that. They're utilizing old techniques to engage, which tend to be very long-winded, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and Lori, I was laughing when you were saying that, because I'm like, I think in the last 2 weeks I've seen a few, and you said 400 to 500, 700 word, overly justifying. I'm going to tell you everything about us that, in the marketing words, I mean, a lot of what you do is marketing, right? It's
sure.
And, it needs to be about the other person on the other side, not about you. So, overly justifying in an email. Oh, wow. And you said you do offer a email audit? Is that?
Yeah. It's one of the first things I like to do with clients. I ask them to send me anywhere from 15 to 20 outbound emails. I'm especially interested in the ones that didn't get a response. And I'm looking for how long was it? What was the tone like? Are you saying way too much about your organization as opposed to focusing on the connection that your potential sponsor has with your organization? And are you really being respectful of that person's time? I think that's why the other reason the power of brevity works is because when you send a very well-crafted, shorter email that makes that connection, that's telling the person on the other side you've really thought about it and you respect their time. And, time is money. So that also is going to separate you from other organizations that are trying to engage those same people.
This episode is brought to you by Donorbox, the online fundraising platform that streamlines your process, elevates your donations, and ensures a user-friendly experience for your supporters. Explore the world of simplified, seamless fundraising at donorbox.org today.
I love the power of brevity. On the marketing side, we say write for lazy readers. And
I love it.
There's a lot of overlap there. Okay.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
So speaking of me being a lazy reader, and I have to confess, I've yet to read your book. Yeah. The Boardroom Playbook. Yet to read it. But can you share a little bit more about it? Because I know for a lot of organizations, getting their board to do anything is a very difficult and scary thing. So can you share a little bit more about your book?
Yeah, so it's the Boardroom Playbook, the not so ordinary guide to corporate funding for your purpose-driven foundation. So our purpose-driven organization. So the whole idea was, how can I provide some really strong tips and basically build a playbook for you in order to really excel in the boardroom per se. But what I mean by that is dealing with larger level decision makers. How do you get their attention? For instance, I talk a lot more about power of brevity in the book. I also give tips about presentation style, about research, where you should be researching, what you should include in your outreach, taking you through the entire process of research to outreach to a meeting, to a proposal, to actually managing the potential sponsorship coming in. So it really is a user-friendly guide. I wrote it for very busy people in mind. It's only 103 pages, lots of bullet points and subheadings, so a very easily digestible read. And I have a lot of fun in it too. There's some great stories in there, and I think people can really take a lot from it if they're interested in any type of business development or corporate sponsorship development tips and techniques.
So I want to make sure I know I'm adding that to my reading list.
Great.
Sure. And I will encourage, I know one of our partners definitely needs to read that book to kind of level up their sponsorship. But I know you mentioned the power of brevity, and it sounded like you have a pretty solid, like this should be the scope and sequence of developing a partnership. But where else, maybe other than people just kind of like shooting from the hip, right, and not following a process, or being them focused or long-winded, like I'm being right now, where else do you see organizations go wrong when it comes to sponsorship?
Well, I think it all starts with that prep before you even send an email. A lot of folks will just go to a website, but they're not really doing the deep dive into it that maybe they should. So, for instance, it's much more powerful. Let's say that you're a nonprofit that's handling food insecurity issues, right? You're the folks that you're serving, food banks, what have you. And it's much more powerful to send an outreach to someone and say something specific like, based on the work you've done in supporting, X food bank in their efforts to also provide meals to family pets, working with XYZ food company. Again, I'm just making this up. That's a lot stronger to reference versus we know that you're interested in food insecurity. So taking that extra step, going to the website, looking at their annual reports, looking at their reports to the community. If you look at anything around corporate social responsibility or what the corporate foundation is doing, you're going to find some specific examples of what that company is doing. That is where they want to show off to their stakeholders, right? Those annual reports, those reports to the community. So there's a gold mine in there that you can reference to make that important connection I talked about earlier. So really going back to your question, that is a technique that I don't see many people use. They tend to go with a more quicker connection at the front, and talk much more about themselves versus they should be doing the opposite. Be more specific about what you found about that potential funder that you could talk about in order to get interest for another conversation.
Okay. Yeah. And I think it is funny. And I was just talking, full confession, I was just talking to a chief development officer that comes from a major gift standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what you're saying to me and I'm an annual fund girl and and a lot of the intentionality is very similar as in like the major gift space, but somehow, she was like, I can't deal with this. We have, an end of year campaign and how are we going to get corporate sponsors? And it was difficult for her to wrap her head around. So I think it's even just the basic, you need to research ahead of time and be intentional and focus on the other person, not your own organization, to make the connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And my other piece of advice too is create scalability in the outreach. I think one of the areas where people get really, really lost is they'll come up with a list of 50 corporations they want to engage, and they're very excited to do it. And then they start doing it, and then other things happen, and then that engagement list gets put to the side. So I like to say 5, not 50. Take 5 companies over a 5-week period, and each week learn more about that company and commit to an outreach that week. So basically you're outreaching 5 companies within 5 weeks, only one a week. That is much more scalable into your busy day than trying to outreach 50 whenever, right? And I also find the quality of the outreach that you're drafting is much higher when you're just really focused on one per week.
Work smarter, not harder, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I love that tip. So I'd love to hear, I know, again, I said, like, I come from the development side. And for some people, when I say corporate sponsorships and corporate partners, like, that's a foreign language in the nonprofit world, especially. We're like, whoa, those are corporations. We don't even know how to speak their language. And so for maybe some of our listeners, they're still trying to be like, wait, what does that look like? Can you, walk us through maybe one of your success stories and like what did the funding or partnership look like afterwards?
Oh gosh, there are so many several different examples, and depending on what type of organization you are. But since we're really talking about nonprofits, I'm going to stick to examples that are more related to a 501c3. So I worked with a national organization that represents and provides services to those that are in free media. You know, those that are creating newspapers or blogs, what have you, but they don't, you know, it's not commercial. So they actually had a program they were working on to try to provide free editing services for these folks in the field that are maybe in the midst of a disaster. I mean, imagine trying to cover a hurricane if you're down in Florida, or when the natural disasters that have happened throughout our world, right? And, you know, maybe you don't have electricity. Maybe you don't have, you just never know, right? So they created this thing called Editor Corps, and they were looking for funding in order to provide free editing services to these journalists. So we were able to align a corporate foundation that has interests in free speech and supporting journalists to funding this program, and they received funding for it. So, you know, that's one larger example. If I think of something, you know, that's small and community driven, I think of a 501c3 that I've worked with that's local business leaders that are looking to get together and really do more in terms of resourcing the community in the area of workplace development, workforce development, education. So we were able to put together a webinar series that we got corporate sponsorship dollars from to present the webinar. So they had people already scheduled to take part in the webinar to learn more about, you know, workforce development. And then we brought in this sponsor who basically they had a professional come on from their organization to introduce the speaker and just talk about how glad they were to support this type of content. And that was it. So, you know, that's an example of something a smaller organization did, utilizing materials and programming they already utilize. So it's not like you even have to create something from scratch. You're probably already doing something that is sponsorable.
And speaking of sponsorable, I know you use the term, and I'm aware of it, but I think it's important to like really get to the heads of the other side of the aisle, right? The corporate side. CSR. What is it?
Yeah. So CSR is corporate social responsibility, and it's an area that has become of great interest to many Fortune 1000 companies, as well as other medium-sized companies. And the purpose of corporate social responsibility, it kind of defines it in the title, right? The corporation knows that it needs to be a good corporate citizen. And the corporation understands that they need to get involved with good things in their community. But community is a very broad term. It doesn't just mean geographic community. It means the community of their stakeholders. What are their customers interested in? What are their employees interested in, right? So what I find is a lot of times if a corporation doesn't have a corporate philanthropy, like a corporate foundation, the corporate CSR department does have a budget to either work with nonprofits and help support them in some way in terms of their programming or their events. I also see this with associations. If you have any associations listening that are looking to find sponsorship opportunity, corporate social responsibility is a great place to look. The other reason I like CSR, they tend to be more easier to contact and more interested in wanting to have a conversation with you. I know a lot of nonprofits that sometimes will get in the trap of just contacting the marketing department and just not getting a response. Remember, marketing, you're competing with, hundreds of other business development folks that are trying to get their attention. So I find CSR levels the playing field more, and they are in a position where they want to speak to people outside of the organization. Because let's be frank, not all the time, every time marketing folks want to talk because they have so much going on, right?
Yeah, it's so true. And I think, I can think of from our end, a few organizations we work with that have got snuck in the CSR route.
Yeah.
Like corporate engagement days, maybe some volunteer days that ended up being over, a relationship, a period of time resulting in a larger gift coming through their foundation, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to mention there seems to be a trend now, which works really well for all of us that are doing this, to have one senior level person that's overseeing both corporate social responsibility and, if they have one, a corporate philanthropy. So that means you've got one decision maker for two pots of money, for lack of a better term, right? So that could be very powerful to you as you're engaging that type of decision maker.
Yeah, that's go make that person your friend.
That's right. That's right.
So for individuals maybe that are listening, that are still like, Lori, this all sounds great. Like, how do I start? You know, you mentioned the prospect list and start with 5 to do the research before. Can you give any advice if, especially like the whole feeling of going out and doing this makes them so nervous? Like, what advice would you give someone in that space?
So the first piece of advice I'd like to give is start with your existing sponsors, or your existing donors, if you're thinking about this from a donor perspective. Probably the biggest misconception that I hear is, well, we want to bring on more sponsors, but we want to be careful with our existing sponsors. We don't want to make them feel like we're abandoning them, or we don't want to go back to them to ask for more money. That's the absolute wrong mentality to have. If you are looking to grow and you have new programs that you're excited about, or you want to reposition an existing program, start with your existing sponsor, but see it as scheduling a meeting or a conversation to say, I just want to kind of give you a check-in as to what we're doing here at XYZ, at our nonprofit. I want to let you know this is going on. I wanted you to be the first to see it. And as always, we really appreciate the support you're providing us now, but just be aware we're going to be doing this. What I find happens is a natural curiosity occurs, and it's actually your sponsor or your donor that says, oh, how can I be a part of that? So, and the other thing is too, there's nothing worse than your sponsor or your donor finding somebody else associated with a new program that they didn't know about. That's a very easy way to anger your sponsor or your donor that you didn't involve them, considering they have been a part of your organization a lot longer than new folks, right? So a great place to start is, what are you doing right now to engage your existing donors and sponsors to let them know the things that you want to do? And that's just really a great place to start.
Okay. And so, Lori, I'm a huge fan. For those that don't follow Lori, especially on LinkedIn, I think you've heard just from this episode how many great nuggets you've given us to take, especially for people taking their first steps into sponsorship or really leveling up their approach to partnering with the corporations. But I'll confess that I felt a little seen with some of your tips. Have you ever taken StrengthsFinder before?
I have.
Okay. What are your top 2 strengths?
Oh gosh, I might be confusing this with, activator. Does that make sense? Yeah. I was very high on activator, but I know there's another test I'm thinking of where I'm a high D.
Okay.
Yeah. But I know I'm a very high activator. I can't think of the other one though. You got me there.
We might be the same. I'm activator is 1 and woo is 2. I wonder if I'm like activator woo strategy. But I know you talk a lot. Well, maybe you'll feel seen too, because activator, right, is my top. And you emphasize a lot in content and advice on follow through.
Yeah.
And one thing I'm personally, as an activator, I'm great at starting things. I am great at initiating, creating, right? But I always hire for follow through because I don't have it. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of my structure. So, talk a little bit about follow through. Like, why is that so important? What does that look like? So I know I'm like, oh, she's calling me out. Or sure, there's multiple times falling through. No. So yeah.
I just find that and we're going to just use email as the example because I think most people can relate to that. I think naturally there's something about the number 3. People will try something 3 times, and if it doesn't work, they tend to get disinterested. Yeah. How that helps though is if you know people operate that way, that should keep you motivated to keep engaging potential sponsors. Because I actually had a recent opportunity this week with a client who told me that they had been outreaching someone for 5 months and finally got the meeting. So, it can take a while. This work is a marathon, not a sprint, right? So I think that's really important to keep in mind. Corporate engagement is a relationship building marathon. In no way is a sprint. Things don't happen overnight. Part of that includes your follow through and having a strategy to follow up besides just following up, right? So I kind of cover this in the book, but the whole idea is to think about what are some other touch points that you could send to your potential sponsor that you're trying to engage that could interest them. That could be finding something on their LinkedIn that is a mutual connection to you. That could be positive company news that you heard about them that you think could relate to the sponsorship that you're talking about. It could be that you have a personal connection. I do a lot of work with, I'm a fan of basset hounds. I'm a fan of animal rescue in general, but I have a basset hound. I love basset hounds and I've done some work with our local basset hound nonprofit. And I actually was able to connect with a decision maker who I had been trouble connecting with for a long time, finally did some additional research and saw that she also had a basset hound. So I was able to connect with her on that and finally got the meeting because of that. So the whole idea is to continuously find new bits of information that you could outreach with in order to keep the follow-up going. I also have a follow-up best practice that I use. I call it my 7x7, where every 7 days, 7 business days, you follow up for 7 weeks. And then if after that, I'm still not getting a response, I'll probably take a break for about 60 days and then re-engage again.
Okay. That is a great, I am marking down where this is so I can come back and listen to that exact tip. And I know that we will be using that, and Nonprofit Marketing Nerds. So you've given so much information. I'm sure a lot of the listeners that are listening right now are going to go back and re-listen. But for those that are like, wow, Lori, those are great pieces of advice. I want to know more. I want to follow. Where can they find your playbook?
Yeah. So the Boardroom Playbook you can find on Amazon. So that is the easiest place to find it. You can also contact me on LinkedIn at Lori Zoss Kraska, also thegrowthowl.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lori, so much for your time. And thank you.
Thank you. It's great being here.
Thank you for tuning in to Social Trailblazers. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who are passionate about making a difference. Special thanks to our sponsor, Donorbox, for supporting this podcast and the incredible work of nonprofits everywhere. Join us next time as we continue to dive deep into the motivations of the change makers shaping our world. Until then, keep trailblazing.